The earth is blessed with the bounties of nature. To help maintain and pass on the global environment to posterity, two scientists have presented paths aimed at developing a sustainable society. One is Professor Brian Walker, the Australian ecologist. Focusing on the concept of nature's inherent resilience, he's been promoting the importance of strengthening its ability to recover from disturbance.
Because resilience is very important. And it's very important that we try and get an understanding in the general public, that what resilience is really all about.
The other is Professor Malin Falkenmark, the Swedish hydrologist. She clarified the existence of invisible water, which had been previously overlooked, and advocated a new means to help solve the global food problem.
Water is water, that's where development starts. My effort is to make a clear understanding of water.
The 27th Blue Planet Prize for 2018 was presented to these two professors. Regarded as the Nobel Prize in the field of environmental issues, the prize is awarded every year to major contributors to the solving of global environmental issues. Each winner receives a trophy and 50 million yen. In this program, we will look at the research conducted by the two 2018 prize winners and the significant results they have achieved for the future of humankind. The suburbs of Canberra, the capital of Australia. Brian Walker, Honourable Research Fellow of the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, is observing the ecology of the plant life here. His great achievement was to present an idea that highlighted the need to strengthen resilience in order to maintain a sustainable environment. Resilience refers to the natural ability of an ecosystem to function in the same way as up to now in the aftermath of a disturbance. By showing familiar examples, Walker explained the meaning of resilience. This tree, called paperbark, is native to Australia.
See, Australia all the trees get very used to big wind. So a big wind blew this tree down. It doesn't mean it's dead and finished, because these buds all along here are little buds, and that bud grows up again. And so that's resilient. It comes back again.
Walker also points out that in some cases the system can't return to its original state. The use of grazing land is one example. Farmers can decide on the number of cattle to put out to pasture. If they start increasing the number, part of the pasture will start decreasing. Walker focused on that change.
And then at some point, if you take away the cattle, then the rangeland goes back. But then in another case, if you do this and you go down to a certain point and you take away the cattle, it doesn't go back. And it just keeps getting worse. And that's what's happening over much of the sub-Saharan Africa. It's desertification.
The overgrazing case pointed out by Walker provides an important hint for us in thinking about the sustainability of the global environment. It's the idea of grasping the resilience that nature possesses, as well as the functions of human society regarded as a big system.
So we're heading into an unknown future, and we don't know the kinds of changes that are going to happen to us. The only way you can deal with that is to try and make the whole system able to cope and self-adjust and self-organize. And that's why resilience is so important today.
Walker was born in 1940 in Rhodesia, today's Zimbabwe, in Africa. He apparently spent most of his boyhood time exploring the savannah and the forests. As time went by, he started developing an interest in the way nature operates.
How did nature fit together? How do one thing relate to another thing? And why did this thing occur there and not over there? And so it was always that exploring to try and get an answer to something that I didn't really understand. Just fascinated with those questions.
Walker, who had grown up in a rich natural environment, entered university to study agriculture. After graduation, he worked as a land development officer. As he worked, however, similar questions to those he had had in his boyhood came into his head.
And how plants and animals influence each other. In some parts where there was agriculture, I could see that there were animals. In other parts, they weren't there. So why was that? And so more and more, those questions came up. And so I said, okay, I'm now going to go and get a PhD, a higher degree, but in ecology. And that's what I wanted to do. So I did that.
Walker moved to a university in Canada and earned a doctoral degree in ecology. He returned to Africa after graduation and repeated field work with his students in various environments, including savanna and valleys. As he progressed with his research, he started questioning a basic assumption. It was related to the fundamental concept of ecology.
At the time, the theory behind ecology was that you could see changes happening in many ways. The system would go back to that type again, and it was all smooth changes. But in fact, what we were seeing in the field with my students, the system was like that, and then it became like that. And it wouldn't go back to the other kind.
Investigating the cause, Walker encountered a thesis which would have a great impact on his later research life. It was Resilience and Stability of Ecological Systems by C.S. Holling from the University of British Columbia. The thesis taught Walker new perspectives. A state which doesn't return to the original state means that the system is not functioning correctly. What happened there? What was the factor which caused that? And at what point did it occur? We have to understand all these elements.
And then I saw this paper by this man called Holling. And I thought to myself, yes, that's right. Because it gave me a different perspective of how these systems work.
Walker learned the importance of nature's resilience in ecosystems from his experiences during fieldwork and from Holling's thesis.
Resilience is the ability of a system to cope with a shock, a disturbance, but keep functioning in the same way, not to become some other kind of system, not to collapse.
Walker's book, Resilience Thinking, explains the concept of resilience by comparing it to a ball at the bottom of a basin. The ball is stable inside the basin if it's in a natural state. If the basin somehow becomes smaller and shallower, and a disturbance occurs there, the ball may spill out of the basin. If the disturbance is stopped at some point, the ball goes back to its original state and becomes stable again. This is the nature of resilience. However, if the basin becomes much smaller, the ball goes over the edge and rolls into an alternative basin. It is then unable to return to its original state. Walker says there is an important factor involved in increasing resilience. That is diversity.
It's a very important part of Resilience is having a high diversity of species. So it's very nice. And if you look around, you'll see that there are different kinds of, this one here is a different species to that one there. There are different kinds of eucalypt species when you look through, because if the rains come a bit early, then some species do better. Then if the rains come late, other species do better. If there's a frost, some species don't do well and others do well. If there's a drought, other species do well, and so it's this complementary behavior.
But in modern society, the diversity which is important for resilience tends to be removed. Walker has raised an alarm over this.
The trouble is, in today's world, many times in social systems, that's considered redundancy. Just find the one that's doing it best and fastest, get rid of the others. They're redundant. But in fact, what you're doing is you're making the system very non-resilient. Now, you look around you in all of the businesses that operate in the country and the bureaucracies. What are they trying to do? Get rid of redundancies. But often it's not redundant. It's not clever to simply think that you can get rid of all ways of doing things except one. Because if something goes wrong with that one, then the system will collapse.
In 1999, Walker launched Resilience Alliance, in which researchers of various specialties, including social scientists and economic scholars, participate for collaborative study.
Ecologists, when you begin only looking at the ecosystems, for example, whether it's a national park or a coral reef system or whatever, and they also understand what society is doing, how that's affecting that system. And it's affecting it sometimes in very bad ways. And so they say, you should stop doing that. But they won't stop doing that. And they do sometimes rational things and sometimes irrational things, unless that is dealt with properly by social scientists.
Professor Carl Folke was a core member of the Resilience Alliance at the time of its foundation. As an expert on ecological economics, he's been studying together with Walker.
And then he's been completely instrumental in taking the whole resilience research forward, and especially more lately he has moved into practice and really applying and using resilience thinking for guiding humanity towards sustainability. So his contribution is enormous.
Since retiring from the front line of research, Walker spends more time at home with his wife Laura. He gives lectures at universities abroad and acts as a mentor for young researchers.
He's a good father, he's a good husband, and he's very involved in his work and very passionate about what he does. And now that he's retired and his life is less busy, we're a lot more together than we were before.
The research aiming at building a society with high resilience, to which Walker contributed a great deal of energy, is now expanding horizons in all kinds of fields. The Raptor project supports developing countries. One of its purposes is to create sustainable development systems based on the research results of the Resilience Alliance. In Ethiopia, in cooperation with local residents, efforts are being made to raise yields with a farming method using rainwater.
I think we're in a very difficult position right now all around the world. I do think that we have to take a much stronger stance about climate change. Then you can do what you want to it. That kind of image for the future is just a disaster. And so we have to understand that we're part of that world. So, and I think if in doing that, we can overcome the many obstacles that we're looking at now, where we're part of the ecosystems we live in and we see ourselves as part of that. That would be the world that I would think would be best for us all.
Stockholm, Sweden. It's World Water Week in August 2018. Researchers and entrepreneurs from more than 130 countries gathered to attend the many seminars and symposiums being held on the theme of water, ecosystems, and the fostering of human resources. This event has been held every year on the theme of the relationship between water and the environment, economics, and poverty. It was Professor Malin Falkenmark who launched it 29 years ago. With her 60-year-long career as a hydrologist, she can be described as a pioneer in this field.
But hydrology wasn't studied at that time in the 60s, in the 1950s and 60s. It was an empty space.
Hydrology is the scientific study of the cycle of water on Earth. The total volume of water on Earth is about 1,400 million cubic kilometers, most of it seawater. Heated seawater evaporates, and eventually clouds are formed, which sends down rain and provides fresh water. The amount of fresh water that people can use for living is said to be about 0.01% of the entire volume. In the field of hydrology, research is carried out on how water circulates in environments and regions under different conditions. Falkenmark was concerned about the water shortages caused by major droughts in Africa in the 1970s and 80s. She created an index in order to clarify the degree of water shortage for every region. Setting the annual amount of usable water at 1,700 cubic meters per person, areas which go below this standard are said to be suffering a water shortage. Called the Falkenmark Index, it is used worldwide, including by UN agencies.
The warming will be felt through water phenomena, droughts, floods, etc. We are living down here on Earth, and here life depends on water.
Falkenmark was born in 1925 in Stockholm in Sweden as the eldest daughter of 5 siblings. Her mathematical skills at high school encouraged her to take the first steps towards becoming a scientist.
I was better than the teacher. I could solve problems that he couldn't solve.
At university, she studied physics, chemistry, and dynamics in addition to mathematics, and earned master's degrees. After leaving graduate school, she joined the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute. When she was involved in a job investigating the efficiency of hydraulic power plants, her boss suggested she should return to graduate school to study hydrology in order to acquire the knowledge required for the research. After studying hydrology at graduate school for 6 years, Falkenmark reached a major turning point. She was selected as a leader of the International Hydrological Decade project, which aimed to solve global issues including floods and droughts.
It broadened my water perspective, of course, because it was the whole world suddenly. And we started to exchange reports with all the other International Hydrological Decade committees.
Around that time, Falkenmark encountered a book which helped to expand her views as a hydrological professional. It was a report about water resources written by M.I. Livovich, Professor of Geography at Moscow State University. It included study results on the worldwide hydrological cycle and the amount of water which flows from rivers into the oceans recorded for every continent.
His book summarizes the data that he had brought together from all the different continents and analyzed the zonal differences. And what he studied was, in other words, world regional hydrological differences. Because at that time, regional water-related regional differences were not at all observed. That has been a basic book for me through life.
In 1984 and 1985, serious droughts occurred in Africa. It was the dry regions which spread south from the Sahara Desert, including Ethiopia, Niger, and Sudan, that suffered from droughts. Falkenmark began a field survey of the droughts by taking a real look at African regional characteristics. These are the areas with an annual rainfall of 100 millimeters or less. Research on the growth of crops in these areas clearly showed that the period for crop growing was 150 days a year or less. Falkenmark also investigated the soil characteristics in each region. She discovered that in the areas where it was difficult to grow crops, deterioration of the soil was advancing and its water-holding capability was decreasing. She started considering means for avoiding drought conditions in areas with such a severe environment.
If we are interested in food production, we have to look in the soil. When soil fertility, when this has been discussed, it has only been discussed in terms of the chemical contents of the soil, but not a word about the water in the soil that makes those chemicals accessible to the roots. So then I suggested a new name for the water in the soil. I said we should call it green water.
The green water, named by Falkenmark, is the water which seeps into the soil after rainwater lands on the ground surface and which the plant roots can draw. It's the invisible water used by plants. Up till then, only water resources from rivers and lakes were thought to be controllable. So in the case of cultivating crops in areas where there is no water, drawing water from those resources was supposed to be carried out.
Africa cannot be fed by irrigated agriculture because the rivers, there's not so much water in the rivers. So the only water they have is the green water in the soil.
She came round to the idea that it would be possible to cultivate crops on dry land if a farming method focusing on the green water in the soil was created. This was a groundbreaking concept which overturned existing common sense. Falkenmark named the visible water in rivers and lakes blue water, as opposed to the green water which is invisible in the soil. She announced the green and blue water concept, which considers water resources from two viewpoints. This brought a revolution to farming in Africa's dry regions. The yields of major crops there drastically increased. The conservation tillage method has been employed in Kenya and Burkina Faso. It's a method which avoids cultivating the soil as much as possible. Narrow, shallow furrows are dug in the soil using special equipment and seeds planted. Tilling the soil in a big way so that it contacts the air a lot oxidizes the organic substances in the soil and the absorbing power of the water in the soil decreases. On the other hand, tilling the soil in a small way lets rainwater percolate down efficiently through the soil and increases the amount of green water plants can use. Environmental scientist Johan Rockström, who could be regarded as Falkenmark's top pupil, talks about the significance of green water.
When you looked at all the statistics in the world, when you looked at all the water resource assessments in the world, they always focus only on blue water. There's an enormous untapped potential in improving the sustainable, efficient use of green water, which can then increase food production, can use water more sustainably without losing blue water and still have better food and livelihoods.
It's the weekend. Falkenmark is at her second house in the suburbs, about 2 hours' drive from Stockholm.
Var ligger det då?
Katthammarsvik.
Det är lite sydöst. Hejsan!
4 generations of the family, including her great-grandchildren, are here today. It's a brief but refreshing time between the professor's busy research efforts.
Stort grattis från oss alla 21 här.
Precis.
What can we leave behind to the next generations? Her passion for water will never stop.
And one message is not for the children but for the schools. They have to include studies in water in the basis for human survival. They should understand where life comes from.
Falkenmark has a big target. The Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, adopted by the United Nations Summit, include 17 categories. She wants to add the concept of green water to goal number 6, clean water and sanitation. And that will help to meet goal number 2, zero hunger.
I'm trying to influence the people who are working on goal number 6, that they have to include green water. But I'm not there yet. The population growth is what has driven me. And the population growth opens the problem of food production. How many people can be fed by the world? That's my reason for my interest in green water.
The winners of the 2018 Blue Planet Prize, which recognizes their contributions to the solution of global environmental issues, were ecologist Brian Walker and hydrologist Malin Falkenmark. The Blue Planet Prize has a history of 27 years. As the result of the research efforts by its successive laureates, environmental protection methods are steadily progressing.
And I went to a meeting of the Resilience Alliance last year in Stockholm, and it was all these young people, and they're looking for pathways. How do we get from where we are to a more resilient system? And that's very encouraging for me.
With the years, ecology continued to develop without water as involved in the idea of how nature works. And now we try to enter water and to make them aware of the fact that water is the bloodstream of the biosphere.
How can we make the most of the research results presented by the 2 professors? That's a challenge each one of us must tackle. This program was made possible by the Asahi Glass Foundation.